Sarah Mitchell never imagined that a routine supply run would turn into a fight for survival. The 42-year-old nurse had been driving through the Arizona desert for nearly 3 hours, heading back to Phoenix after visiting her elderly mother in a small town near the New Mexico border. The morning had started bright and clear, with endless blue skies stretching above the rust-colored landscape. She had packed sandwiches, filled her thermos with coffee, and loaded her favorite playlist onto her phone. Everything seemed perfect for an easy drive home. But the desert is unpredictable, and weather in this part of the country can change faster than anyone expects. Around noon, Sarah noticed dark clouds gathering on the horizon. They looked ominous, rolling toward her like a massive wave of gray and black. She had lived in Arizona for 15 years and had seen her share of desert storms, but something about these clouds made her uneasy. They moved with unusual speed, swallowing the sun and casting shadows across the highway. Within minutes, the temperature dropped and the wind began to howl. Sarah gripped the steering wheel tighter as the first drops of rain hit her windshield. They were heavy and loud, drumming against the metal roof of her sedan. Soon the drops turned into sheets of water, and visibility dropped to almost nothing. She slowed down, squinting through the windshield as her wipers worked frantically to clear the glass. The highway, which had been empty for miles, now felt like a dangerous trap. She could barely see the road markings, and the wind pushed against her car with frightening force. Thunder cracked overhead, so loud it made her jump. Lightning followed immediately, illuminating the desert in brief, blinding flashes. Sarah's heart pounded as she realized this was no ordinary storm. This was a monsoon, one of those violent desert storms that could flood dry riverbeds in minutes and turn highways into rushing rivers. She needed to find shelter, but there was nothing around. No gas stations, no rest stops, just endless desert and the angry sky above. Her phone rang, startling her. It was her daughter, Emily, calling from college in California. Sarah considered not answering, but she knew Emily would worry if she didn't pick up. She pressed the button on her steering wheel to answer through the car's speaker system. "Mom, where are you? I saw there's a huge storm in Arizona." Emily's voice sounded worried. "I'm okay, honey. I'm on the highway trying to get through this storm. It came out of nowhere," Sarah replied, trying to sound calm even though her hands were shaking on the wheel. "Mom, you need to pull over. Don't drive in this. Find somewhere safe," Emily insisted. "There's nowhere to pull over, Em. It's just desert out here." "I'll be fine. I just need to keep going and get through it," Sarah said, though she wasn't sure she believed her own words. They talked for another minute before the connection started breaking up. Static filled the line, and then the call dropped completely. Sarah glanced at her phone mounted on the dashboard and saw the signal bars disappear. She was alone now, with no way to call for help if she needed it. The rain intensified and hail began to fall. Small ice pellets at first, then larger ones that sounded like rocks hitting the car. Sarah flinched with each impact, praying that her windshield wouldn't crack. She slowed to a crawl, barely moving forward. The wind had grown so strong that it pushed her car sideways. She fought to keep it straight, her arms aching from the effort. Then she saw it. Awash, one of those dry riverbeds that crisscross the desert. But it wasn't dry anymore. Water was rushing across the highway, a brown churning river that had appeared in minutes. Sarah slammed on her brakes, her car skidding on the wet pavement. She stopped just feet from the water's edge, her heart hammering in her chest. She sat there, breathing hard, trying to decide what to do. She couldn't cross the wash. The water was too deep, too fast. Cars that tried to cross flooding washes often got swept away. She had seen the news reports, the warnings that said, "Turn around, don't drown." But she couldn't stay on the highway either. The storm was getting worse and she was completely exposed. Looking around desperately, Sarah spotted something off to the side of the road. A dirt track barely visible through the rain, leading away from the highway toward a cluster of rocks and what might be a small canyon. It wasn't much, but it was something. Maybe she could find shelter there, wait out the storm until it passed. She carefully turned her car onto the dirt track, her tires slipping in the mud. The car bounced over rocks and ruts, and Sarah gripped the wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. The track led upward slightly away from the flooding wash. She followed it for about half a mile, the car struggling through the mud and water. Finally, she reached the rocks. They formed a small outcropping, not quite a cave, but enough to provide some shelter from the wind and rain. Sarah parked as close as she could and turned off the engine. She sat there for a moment, listening to the storm rage outside. The hail had stopped, but the rain continued to pour down and the wind howled like a living thing. She was safe for now, But she was also stranded. Her phone still had no signal, and she had no idea how long the storm would last. Sarah pulled her jacket tighter around herself and tried to stay calm. She had food, water, and a full tank of gas. She would be okay. She just needed to wait it out. Hours passed and the storm showed no signs of letting up. Sarah had eaten one of her sandwiches and finished her coffee, but her nerves were still on edge. The rain continued its relentless assault on her car, and every crack of thunder made her jump. She tried to distract herself by listening to the radio, but all she could get was static. Her phone remained useless, showing no signal no matter how many times she checked it. As afternoon turned to evening, Sarah began to worry about more than just the storm. The sun would set soon, and she would be alone in the dark desert with no way to contact anyone. Her daughter would be frantic. Her supervisor at the hospital would wonder why she hadn't called in. But there was nothing she could do except sit and wait. She thought about trying to walk back to the highway, but that seemed foolish. The ground was soaked and she could barely see 10 feet in front of her car. Besides, even if she made it to the highway, who would stop to help in weather like this? She would be worse off than she was now. The temperature inside the car was dropping. Sarah turned on the engine periodically to run the heater, but she was worried about wasting gas. She didn't know how long she might need it. She pulled a blanket from the back seat, one she kept for emergencies, and wrapped it around herself. At least she had thought to keep emergency supplies in her car. That was something. As darkness fell, the storm finally began to ease. The rain slowed from a downpour to a steady drizzle, and the thunder grew more distant. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. Maybe the worst was over. Maybe she could try to drive back to the highway in the morning when it was light and she could see where she was going. She reclined her seat slightly and tried to get comfortable. Sleep seemed impossible, but she was exhausted from the stress and fear of the day. Her eyes grew heavy despite her racing thoughts. She dozed fitfully, waking every time the wind gusted or a branch scraped against her car. Sometime in the middle of the night, Sarah woke to complete silence. The rain had stopped. She sat up, pushing the blanket aside, and looked out the window. The clouds had cleared, and stars filled the sky in a brilliant display. The desert moon cast pale light across the landscape, making everything look otherworldly and strange. Sarah got out of the car, stretching her stiff muscles. The air was cold and smelled of wet earth and sage. She walked a few steps away from the car, careful not to slip on the muddy ground. The quiet was almost eerie after hours of the storm's fury. She could hear water dripping from the rocks and the distant sound of the wash still running, though not as violently as before. She pulled out her phone, hoping that maybe now she would have a signal. Nothing. She held it up, waving it around like that might help. Still nothing. Frustration welled up inside her. She was stranded and no one knew where she was. Morning came slowly, the sky turning from black to gray to pale pink. Sarah hadn't really slept, just dozed in uncomfortable intervals. When there was enough light to see by, she decided to assess her situation properly. She walked around her car, checking for damage. The body had some dents from the hail, but nothing serious. The tires looked okay, though they were caked with mud. The real problem was the track she had driven in on. In the daylight, she could see that it was completely washed out in places. Deep channels had been carved by rushing water, and rocks had been pushed across the path. Her car, a small sedan, would never make it back through that terrain. She was truly stuck. Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. What was she going to do? She had maybe 2 days' worth of food and water if she rationed carefully. But would anyone find her before then? Did anyone even know to look for her here? She had told Emily she was on the highway, not that she had turned off onto some unmarked dirt track. She decided to walk toward the highway to see if she could get a signal or find help. She locked her car and started walking, following the ruined track back the way she had come. The mud sucked at her shoes with every step, and she had to climb over several washouts. After about 20 minutes of difficult walking, she reached a point where she could see the highway in the distance. Her heart sank. The wash that had blocked her path yesterday was still flowing, though not as aggressively, but more troubling was what she saw on the other side. The highway itself was damaged. A section of the pavement had been undermined and had collapsed. Even if she could cross the wash, she couldn't drive on that road. Sarah stood there staring at the destruction, feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. She was at least 5 miles from the nearest town, with no phone signal and no way to drive out. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, beautiful but indifferent to her survival. She walked back to her car slowly, trying to conserve her energy. When she got there, she sat on the hood and really looked at where she was. The rocks that had provided shelter formed an interesting formation, almost like a small amphitheater. Beyond them, the land rose gradually toward distant mesas. It was beautiful in a harsh way, but beauty didn't help her now. Sarah knew she had to make a plan. She couldn't just sit here and hope someone would stumble upon her. She needed to do something, but what? Walk toward the nearest town? That seemed dangerous. Stay with the car and try to signal for help? But how? She had no flares, no bright cloth to wave. She went through her car systematically, taking inventory of everything she had. 2 bottles of water, 3 protein bars, half a bag of chips and the remains of her sandwiches. A first aid kit, a flashlight with working batteries, the blanket, her phone and car charger, though neither was useful without a signal or working engine to charge from. Some basic tools in the trunk. Not much to work with. As the sun climbed higher, the temperature began to rise. The desert, so cold at night, was quickly becoming hot. Sarah found some shade under the rock outcropping and settled in to wait. She didn't know what else to do. The second day in the desert was harder than the first. Sarah woke with a pounding headache from dehydration and stress. She had rationed her water carefully, but the heat was intense, and her body needed more than she was giving it. She sat in her car with the windows open, trying to catch any breeze that might offer relief. By midday, the temperature inside the car was unbearable. Sarah moved back to the shade of the rocks, bringing her supplies with her. She tried to stay still, to conserve energy and moisture, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. She thought about her daughter, imagining how worried Emily must be. She thought about her mother, who had health problems and would be distressed by her disappearance. She thought about her colleagues at the hospital who were probably short-staffed without her. The desert around her was alive with subtle movements. Lizards darted between rocks and birds circled overhead. Sarah watched them with a mixture of fascination and envy. They belonged here. They knew how to survive in this harsh environment. She was an intruder, unprepared and vulnerable. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah decided she needed to try walking toward civilization again. Sitting here wasn't helping. Maybe if she followed the highway from a distance, staying on higher ground, she could eventually reach the town or at least get close enough for her phone to pick up a signal. She packed her remaining water and food into a small bag she found in her trunk. She put on her most comfortable shoes, though they weren't hiking boots, and started walking. She left a note on her dashboard saying which direction she had gone and when, in case someone found her car. The walking was difficult. The ground was uneven, covered with rocks and thorny plants that grabbed at her clothes. The sun beat down mercilessly, and within an hour Sarah was sweating heavily. She stopped frequently to rest, sitting on rocks and trying to catch her breath. She checked her phone obsessively, but there was still no signal. After about 2 hours, Sarah realized she had made a mistake. She had thought she could see the town in the distance, but it was just a trick of the desert light. A mirage created by heat and exhaustion. She was no closer to civilization than when she had started, and now she was farther from her car, her only real shelter. Defeated, she turned back. The return journey was even harder because now she was tired and starting to feel the effects of too little water and too much sun. Her lips were cracked, her throat was dry, and her legs trembled with every step. By the time she saw her car again, the sun was beginning to set. Sarah collapsed next to her car, too exhausted to even open the door. She lay on the cooling ground, staring up at the sky as it changed from blue to orange to purple. She had failed. She had wasted water and energy on a futile attempt to save herself. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, running down her dusty cheeks. That night was the worst yet. Sarah's body ached from the long walk, and her headache had intensified. She was dizzy when she stood up, and her hands shook when she tried to open her last bottle of water. She allowed herself only small sips, knowing she had to make it last. But she was so thirsty that it took all her willpower not to drain the entire bottle. She lay in her car, wrapped in the blanket, and faced a terrifying truth. She might not make it out of here. No one knew where she was. The damaged highway meant fewer people would be traveling this route. She could die here, alone in the desert, and it might be days or weeks before anyone found her. The thought filled her with a deep, primal fear. She wasn't ready to die. She had so much she still wanted to do. So many people she loved who needed her. Her mother needed her care. Her daughter needed her support. Her patients needed her skills. She couldn't just give up, but what choice did she have? She was too weak to walk to safety. Her car was stuck. Her phone was useless. She had almost no water left and very little food. The odds were stacked against her in every possible way. Sarah spent that night drifting in and out of consciousness, her dreams mixing with reality. She dreamed of water, of cool mountain streams and cold glasses of ice water. She dreamed of her daughter's face, of her mother's hands holding hers. She dreamed of the hospital, of normal days filled with purpose and routine. When morning came, Sarah barely had the energy to move. Her mouth felt like it was full of cotton and her tongue was swollen. She knew these were signs of serious dehydration. As a nurse, she understood what was happening to her body. Without water soon, her organs would start to fail. She had maybe one more day, two if she was lucky. She forced herself to sit up and take stock of her situation one more time. She was down to about half a bottle of water and one protein bar. Her phone battery was at 15%. She had stopped checking for a signal because it just drained the battery faster. The sun was already climbing, promising another day of brutal heat. Sarah decided to spend the day in the deepest shade she could find under the rocks. She would try to sleep, to conserve as much energy as possible. Maybe somehow help would come. Maybe someone would notice she was missing and send out search parties. Maybe a helicopter would fly over and spot her car. She knew these were long shots, but hope was all she had left. She settled into the shade, sipped a tiny amount of water and closed her eyes. The desert was silent around her except for the wind whistling through the rocks and the occasional cry of a bird. Time seemed to stop and Sarah floated in a haze of heat and thirst and fading hope. In the distance, beyond her awareness, something was moving across the desert. Something that would change everything. But Sarah didn't know this yet. She only knew that she was tired, so tired, and that the world was growing dimmer around the edges. She let herself drift. Not quite sleeping, but not quite awake, suspended between survival and surrender. Sarah's eyes opened slowly to the sound of footsteps on gravel. At first, she thought she was dreaming. The sound was too crisp, too real, but as her mind struggled toward consciousness, she heard it again. Someone was approaching her car. She tried to sit up but found she could barely move. Her body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds and her vision was blurry. Through the haze, she saw a figure standing near her car, looking around. The figure was tall and wearing what looked like jeans and a long-sleeved shirt. Sarah tried to call out, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. The figure turned, and Sarah saw him clearly for the first time. He was a Native American man, probably in his 50s, with long, gray-streaked black hair pulled back from his face. His skin was weathered and brown from years in the sun. He wore boots suitable for hiking and carried a walking stick. When his eyes met hers, she saw concern flash across his face. He approached quickly, moving with the confidence of someone who knew this terrain well. When he reached her, he knelt down, his dark eyes studying her carefully. "You're in bad shape," he said, his voice deep and calm. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. He pulled a canteen from his shoulder and unscrewed the cap. Small sips, not too fast. Sarah wanted to grab the canteen and drink everything in it, but his firm hand controlled the flow. He let her take a few swallows, then pulled it back. "More in a minute. Too much too fast will make you sick," he explained. He sat back on his heels, still watching her. "How long have you been out here?" 3 days, Sarah managed to croak out. "The storm. I got stuck." The man nodded, looking around at the situation. He saw her car covered in mud and dents, the washed-out track, the meager supplies she had left. His expression remained neutral, but Sarah could see him calculating, assessing. "I'm Thomas," he said simply. "I live about 10 miles from here. Saw your car yesterday from the mesa while I was tracking. Took me a while to hike over. This isn't an easy area to reach." "Sarah," she whispered. "Thank you. Thank you for coming." Thomas gave her another small drink of water. "We need to get your strength up, but carefully. You're dehydrated and probably malnourished. Do you have any food left?" Sarah gestured weakly to her protein bar. Thomas examined it and nodded. He broke off a small piece and handed it to her. "Eat slowly. Let it dissolve in your mouth before swallowing," he instructed. While she did this, he went to his pack and pulled out what looked like dried meat and some kind of flat bread. "This is better than that bar. Traditional food. It will help restore your electrolytes." Sarah ate what he gave her, following his instructions. With each small piece of food and each careful sip of water, she felt a little bit of strength returning to her body. Thomas didn't rush her. He seemed content to sit there, watching the desert around them with the patience of someone who understood the land's rhythms. After about half an hour, Sarah felt well enough to talk more coherently. "How did you know I was here?" "No one else came. I thought I was going to die." Thomas looked at her, his expression serious. "The highway is closed. That wash took out a big section. Most people are detouring 50 miles north. Nobody's been coming through here. I was tracking an injured elk when I spotted sun reflecting off your car. Figured I should investigate." The realization of how lucky she was hit Sarah like a physical blow. If this man hadn't been tracking that elk, if he hadn't seen the reflection, if he had decided it wasn't worth investigating, she would have died here. No one would have found her for weeks, maybe months. "I need to get you out of here," Thomas continued. "But we can't go the way you came in. The wash is still too high. There's another route, an old trail that my people have used for generations. It's longer and steeper, but it's passable." "Can you walk?" Sarah tried to stand with Thomas's help. Her legs shook and she felt dizzy, but she managed to stay upright. "I don't think I can walk 10 miles. You don't have to. My truck is about 3 miles from here on the other side of that rise." He pointed to a hill in the distance. "We'll take it slow, rest when you need to. But we need to start moving. Storm season isn't over, and I don't want to be caught out here if another one comes through." Thomas helped Sarah gather her essential belongings, her purse, her phone, some personal items. He left most of the other things, saying they could come back for the car later once the roads were clear and they could get a tow truck in. They started walking, Thomas supporting much of Sarah's weight. He moved slowly, constantly checking on her, making sure she was managing. Every 100 yards or so, he would stop and let her rest, giving her small amounts of water and food. As they walked, Thomas talked, and Sarah was grateful for the distraction. He told her about the land they were crossing, pointing out plants that could be eaten and ones that were poisonous. He showed her animal tracks in the mud and explained what had made them. He talked about growing up on the reservation, learning traditional ways from his grandfather. "My grandfather taught me to read the land," Thomas said as they paused near a large boulder. "He said the desert talks to those who know how to listen. When I saw your car, the land was telling me someone needed help." Sarah listened, fascinated. This man moved through the desert like he was part of it, understanding things she couldn't even begin to comprehend. He knew which way to go without hesitation, avoiding dangerous ground she would have walked right onto. He knew when storms were coming by reading the clouds and the way the birds flew. The 3 miles felt like 30 to Sarah in her weakened state. But Thomas never showed impatience or frustration. He simply adjusted his pace to match hers, offering encouragement when she flagged and wisdom when she grew discouraged. Finally, as the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, they crested a rise, and Sarah saw Thomas's truck parked in a small clearing. It was an old pickup, dusty and dented but solid-looking. To Sarah, it looked like the most beautiful vehicle she had ever seen. Thomas helped Sarah into the passenger seat of his truck and started the engine. The cab was clean but well-worn, with a dream catcher hanging from the rearview mirror and a photograph tucked into the sun visor. Sarah caught a glimpse of a woman and 2 children in the photo before Thomas adjusted the mirror and began driving. The ride was bumpy at first as they navigated the rough terrain, but Thomas drove with practiced ease, avoiding the worst of the rocks and washouts. Sarah leaned back against the seat, feeling the last of her adrenaline draining away. She was safe now. The relief was so overwhelming that tears began streaming down her face. Thomas glanced over at her but said nothing, just handed her a clean bandana from his pocket. Sarah took it gratefully and wiped her eyes. She hadn't cried through the whole ordeal, holding herself together through sheer willpower. Now that she was safe, all the fear and stress came pouring out. "It's okay," Thomas said quietly. "You're allowed to feel it now. You survived something most people never face." They drove for about 20 minutes before reaching a paved road. The transition from the rough desert track to smooth asphalt felt surreal to Sarah. She had spent so long isolated in the wilderness that normal roads seemed almost foreign. Thomas turned onto the highway and picked up speed. "There's a clinic in town," he said. "We should get you checked out properly. You've been through a lot." Sarah nodded. As a nurse, she knew he was right. She needed IV fluids to properly rehydrate, and someone should check her for heat exhaustion and other complications. But first, she needed to let people know she was alive. "My phone," she said suddenly. "Can I borrow yours? I need to call my daughter. She must be frantic." Thomas pulled his phone from his pocket and handed it to her. Sarah's hand shook as she dialed Emily's number. The phone rang once, twice, then Emily answered. "Hello? Em, it's me. It's Mom," Sarah said, her voice breaking. There was a moment of shocked silence, then Emily's voice exploded through the speaker. "Mom, oh my God, Mom! Where are you? Are you okay? We've been looking everywhere. The police search and rescue everyone. Mom, I thought you were dead." Sarah listened to her daughter's words tumbling out in a rush of relief and fear and joy. She answered Emily's frantic questions as best she could, explaining briefly what had happened. She assured her she was safe now, that someone had found her, that she was on her way to get medical help. "I'm coming there," Emily said immediately. "Don't argue with me, Mom. I'm getting in my car right now." "I'll be there in 6 hours." Sarah didn't argue. She wanted to see her daughter more than anything. After promising to call again from the clinic, she hung up and handed the phone back to Thomas. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. I don't know how to repay you for saving my life." Thomas shook his head. "No repayment needed. Out here, we help each other. That's how we survive. Tomorrow it might be me who needs help and someone else will be there." They drove into a small town, not much more than a main street with a few shops, a gas station, and a small medical clinic. Thomas pulled up to the clinic and helped Sarah inside. The staff, a nurse practitioner named Maria, and her assistant rushed over immediately. "This is Sarah," Thomas explained. "Found her in the desert. She's been out there 3 days with minimal water and food. Needs fluids and monitoring." Maria nodded, her professional demeanor taking over. She guided Sarah to an examination room while her assistant started gathering supplies. Thomas lingered in the doorway. "I'll wait out here," he said. "Make sure you're settled before I go." Over the next hour, Maria examined Sarah thoroughly, started an IV to rehydrate her, and treated her minor injuries. She had cuts on her feet from walking in inappropriate shoes, sunburn on her face and arms, and significant dehydration. But overall, she was in remarkably good condition considering her ordeal. "You're lucky," Maria said as she worked. "Another day or two out there, and we'd be having a very different conversation." Desert doesn't forgive mistakes. Sarah knew she was right. She also knew her luck had a name: Thomas. When Maria finally finished her examination and declared that Sarah would recover fully with rest and continued hydration, Sarah asked if she could see Thomas. He was in the waiting room, reading an old magazine and looking completely relaxed. "How are you feeling?" he asked when she appeared, still connected to her IV bag on a rolling stand. "Much better. Maria says I'll be fine," Sarah replied. She sat down next to him, and they were quiet for a moment. "I need to know something. Why did you really come looking for me? You said you saw my car while tracking, but you didn't have to investigate. You could have kept going." Thomas set down his magazine and looked at her thoughtfully. 3 years ago, my daughter got lost in the desert. She was hiking with friends, wandered off the trail, couldn't find her way back. Search and rescue looked for 2 days before they found her. She was dehydrated, scared, but alive. I made a promise then that if I ever had the chance to help someone else in that situation, I would. I couldn't leave you out there any more than I could have left my own daughter." The photograph in his truck made sense now. Sarah felt a deep connection to this man who had saved her, not just because it was the right thing to do, but because he understood the terror of being lost and the relief of being found. "Is your daughter okay now?" Sarah asked. Thomas smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed his serious face. "She's fine. Finishing college in Albuquerque. Wants to be a park ranger, if you can believe it. Says her experience made her want to help others stay safe in the wilderness." They talked for another hour, sharing stories about their families, their lives, their experiences. Sarah learned that Thomas was a carpenter by trade, but spent much of his free time in the desert, maintaining the traditional knowledge his grandfather had passed down to him. He taught wilderness survival skills to kids on the reservation, wanting to ensure the old ways weren't forgotten. When Emily finally arrived, bursting through the clinic doors with tears streaming down her face, Sarah introduced her to Thomas. Emily hugged him fiercely, thanking him over and over until Thomas gently extricated himself, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "Your mother is strong," he told Emily. "She kept herself alive until help could come. That's not easy to do." Before Thomas left, Sarah insisted on getting his contact information. She wanted to stay in touch to properly thank him once she was back on her feet. Thomas gave her his number and address, though he seemed bemused by her insistence. 2 months later, Sarah stood in the parking lot of a community center on the Apache reservation. clutching a box of homemade cookies and feeling more nervous than she had expected. Emily sat beside her in the car, offering moral support. They had driven 3 hours to get here, but Sarah knew she had to come. She had to see Thomas again and properly express her gratitude. The recovery from her ordeal had been harder than she anticipated. Physically, she had healed quickly. The dehydration reversed with proper treatment. Her cuts and burns healed and her strength returned. But mentally, she struggled. She had nightmares about the storm, about being trapped in the desert. She found herself anxious when driving, especially when clouds gathered on the horizon. Her therapist said it was normal, that she had experienced trauma, and it would take time to process. What helped most was focusing on something positive. Sarah had decided to honor Thomas by learning more about his culture and by supporting the work he did teaching wilderness survival. She had made donations to the youth programs on the reservation and had even started taking her own wilderness survival courses. If she was ever in that situation again, she wanted to be better prepared. Thomas had invited her to attend a community gathering where he would be teaching some of the traditional skills to local children. Sarah had jumped at the chance, eager to see him again and to understand more about the world he lived in. Inside the community center, the walls were decorated with traditional artwork and photographs of elders. Tables were set up with various demonstrations, showing everything from traditional crafts to survival skills. Children ran around excitedly, and adults chatted in small groups. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming. Sarah spotted Thomas near the back of the room, surrounded by a group of teenagers. He was showing them something with his hands, demonstrating a technique. When he looked up and saw her, his face broke into a smile. He excused himself from the group and walked over. "Sarah, you came," he said, genuinely pleased. "And you brought your daughter." Emily stepped forward and shook his hand warmly. "Thank you again for saving my mom. I don't think I ever properly thanked you that day at the clinic." Thomas waved off her thanks, but Sarah could see he was touched. She handed him the box of cookies, feeling suddenly silly about such a small gesture for someone who had saved her life. "Homemade chocolate chip," she explained. "I know it's not much, but I wanted to bring something." Thomas accepted the box graciously. "My grandchildren will love these." "Thank you," he gestured around the room. "Would you like to see what we're doing here? We're teaching the young ones how to read the land, how to find water, how to stay safe." For the next few hours, Sarah and Emily followed Thomas around the gathering. He introduced them to elders who shared stories of the old ways, to children eager to learn traditional skills, and to other community members who welcomed them with genuine warmth. Sarah watched Thomas teach a group of kids how to identify edible plants, how to find direction using the sun and stars, and how to build an emergency shelter with minimal materials. She was struck by his patience and his obvious love for passing on this knowledge. These weren't just survival skills to him. They were a connection to his ancestors, a way of maintaining his culture and identity. Every technique he taught came with a story, a piece of history that made the lesson meaningful. During a break, Sarah and Thomas sat outside on a bench overlooking the desert landscape. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Emily had gone inside to help set up dinner tables, leaving them alone. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," Sarah said quietly, "about those days in the desert. I was so unprepared, so foolish. I should have known better than to turn off the highway in a storm." Thomas was silent for a moment, watching the sunset. "The desert teaches hard lessons. But you survived. You kept your head. You rationed your resources. You stayed with your car. Those were smart decisions. Many people panic and make things worse." "I almost gave up," Sarah admitted. "On that last day, I was ready to just let go. If you hadn't come when you did, I would have." "But you didn't give up," Thomas replied firmly. "You held on. That matters. That shows strength." He turned to look at her. "I've been thinking, too, about why I was in that exact place at that exact time. My grandfather used to say there are no coincidences, only the path unfolding as it should. Maybe I was meant to find you. Maybe you were meant to survive." Sarah considered this. She wasn't sure she believed in destiny, but she couldn't deny that the circumstances of her rescue had been remarkably fortunate. "What do you think I'm supposed to do with this second chance?" she asked. Thomas smiled. "Whatever feels right to you. But if you want my opinion, you're already doing it. You're here, learning, growing, not letting fear control you. That's all anyone can do." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the light fade from the sky. Sarah felt a peace she hadn't experienced since before the storm. Being here in this place with this man who had saved her felt like closing a circle that had been left open. Inside, dinner was being served. Traditional foods that Thomas explained to Sarah and Emily as they ate. Fry bread, venison stew, corn dishes prepared in ways Sarah had never tasted before. The flavors were rich and comforting, and the company was even better. Sarah found herself laughing and talking with people she had just met, feeling welcomed in a way that touched her heart. After dinner, there were traditional dances and songs. Thomas's daughter, the one who had been lost in the desert years ago, was there with her own family. She was a beautiful young woman with her father's serious eyes and a warm smile. When Thomas introduced them, she hugged Sarah tightly. "My dad told me about finding you," she said. "I know what you went through. I know how scary it is. I'm so glad you made it." Sarah hugged her back, feeling tears prick her eyes. "Your father is an incredible man. You're very lucky to have him." "I know," she replied, glancing at Thomas with obvious affection. "He's my hero." As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Sarah knew it was time for her and Emily to start their drive back home. She found Thomas helping to clean up, stacking chairs, and gathering trash. "Thank you for inviting us," she said. "This has been one of the most meaningful days I've had in a long time." Thomas set down the chairs he was holding and faced her. "You're always welcome here. You're part of our story now, part of the community. Don't be a stranger." Sarah promised she wouldn't. She had already decided to come back regularly, to volunteer with the youth programs, to learn more about the traditional ways. This place, these people had given her something precious beyond just saving her life. They had given her perspective, connection, and purpose. On the drive home, Emily was quiet for a long time before she finally spoke. "Mom, I'm really proud of you. Not just for surviving, but for the way you've dealt with everything after. A lot of people would have just tried to forget and move on." Sarah reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "I can't forget, and I don't want to. What happened to me was terrible, but it also showed me things I needed to see. It showed me how strong I am, how precious life is, and how much kindness there is in the world. Thomas didn't have to help me, but he did. That's changed me." "Changed you how?" Emily asked. Sarah thought about this as she drove through the darkness, the headlights cutting through the night. "I'm more aware now, more grateful, less likely to take things for granted. And I want to give back, to help others the way Thomas helped me. I've been thinking about volunteering with search and rescue, using my medical skills to help people in emergencies." Emily smiled. "That sounds perfect for you, Mom." 6 months after her rescue, Sarah completed her training and became a certified search and rescue volunteer. She went on her first mission on a cool spring morning, helping to search for a hiker who had gotten lost in the mountains. As she climbed the rocky terrain with her team, scanning the landscape for any sign of the missing person, she thought about Thomas and everything he had taught her. She thought about reading the land, about staying calm in crisis, about the importance of preparation and knowledge. She thought about kindness and community and the threads that connect us all. Most of all, she thought about second chances and the responsibility that comes with them. When they found the hiker, cold and scared but alive, Sarah wrapped him in a thermal blanket and gave him water, just as Thomas had done for her. She saw the relief and gratitude in his eyes and understood, perhaps for the first time, what Thomas had meant about helping others. This was her path forward. Not to forget what had happened in the desert, but to honor it by being for others what Thomas had been for her, a lone figure appearing through the chaos when all hope seemed lost, a reminder that even in our darkest moments we are not truly alone. Sarah smiled as she helped the rescued hiker to his feet. The circle was complete and she was exactly where she was meant to be.